Look at her, 26 and still unmarried. There must be something wrong with her. The whispers followed Sarah Mitchell across the town square as she clutched her books tightly against her chest. 3 proposals rejected, a lifetime of loneliness ahead. That's what everyone predicted for Millfield's stubborn librarian. What they didn't know was that someone was already coming for her, someone who would change everything. The Sunday service had just ended when Reverend Phillips cornered Sarah outside the church. "Miss Mitchell, I've taken the liberty of introducing you to Mr. Cooper." He gestured to a balding man, at least 20 years her senior. "He's in need of a wife, and frankly, you're in need of a husband. Thank you for your concern, Reverend, but—" "The clock is ticking, my dear," he interrupted, patting her hand condescendingly. "Pride is a sin, and you can't afford to be particular anymore." Several churchgoers pretended not to listen while watching intently. This wasn't the first public matchmaking attempt she'd endured. In the small farming town of Millfield in 1876, Sarah Mitchell lived alone in a modest cottage at the edge of town. Her curly red hair refused to stay pinned properly. Her freckled face lacked the porcelain complexion so admired, and her opinions were as strong as her father's best whiskey. Sarah ran the town library, a small building with books donated by wealthy patrons from nearby cities. She'd inherited the position from her father, who had valued education above all else. "Books will never let you down," he told her before consumption took him 3 winters ago. The townsfolk respected Sarah's knowledge but found her odd. She wore practical boots instead of dainty shoes. She spoke about politics and science when ladies were supposed to discuss recipes and fashion. Worst of all, she had turned down 3 marriage proposals because the men couldn't accept her as she was. First came Thomas Baker, the mayor's son, who wanted her to give up the library once they married. Then William Cooper, who laughed when she talked about women someday having the right to vote. Finally, Edward Green, the town doctor, who seemed perfect until he suggested her books were filling her head with dangerous ideas. One chilly autumn morning, Mrs. Holloway burst into the library, eyes wide with excitement. "Have you heard? A stranger arrived on today's coach. A businessman from Chicago, they say. Handsome as the devil himself." Later that afternoon, as Sarah locked up the library, she noticed a tall figure standing across the street. His expensive coat and polished boots marked him as an outsider. When he caught her eye, he tipped his hat and smiled. Something about his gaze made her pause. It wasn't the usual judgment or pity. It was interest. That evening at the town's only restaurant, the room fell silent when the door opened and the stranger walked in, scanning the room until his eyes found Sarah. Without invitation, he approached her table. "Miss Mitchell, my name is James Harrison. I believe I knew your father many years ago. May I join you? I have a proposition that might interest you." Sarah hesitated. Men with propositions were nothing new in her life. "What kind of proposition, Mr. Harrison?" Sarah studied the stranger before gesturing to the empty chair. His eyes were a striking blue, clear and direct. Unlike most men she encountered, he met her gaze without discomfort. "You knew my father?" she asked skeptically. "Indeed. Professor Jonathan Mitchell. We corresponded for years." James placed a worn leather journal on the table. He mentioned his brilliant daughter in nearly every letter. Sarah's hand trembled as she recognized her father's handwriting. The restaurant patrons stared openly now, necks craning to eavesdrop. "I run a publishing company specializing in educational materials," James explained. "I'm looking for someone to help compile a new series of history texts for school children. The job would require relocating to Chicago." The restaurant seemed to hold its collective breath. Leave Millfield? A woman traveling alone to the big city for work, not marriage? "Why me?" Sarah asked plainly. "Surely there are qualified men in Chicago." James hesitated before answering. "Your father spoke highly of your abilities. And frankly, I believe children's education materials benefit from a woman's perspective." For the first time in years, Sarah felt a spark of possibility. But doubt crept in. Could this be real? "Mr. Harrison, forgive my directness, but what exactly do you expect in return for this generosity?" Sarah fixed him with a penetrating stare. Men don't typically offer women professional opportunities without wanting something in exchange. Something flickered across James's face. Surprise, perhaps even respect. A fair question. I expect hard work, dedication, and your unique perspective. Nothing more. Sarah wasn't convinced. You've traveled quite far to recruit a small-town librarian. Why not hire someone already in Chicago? Your father's recommendation carries significant weight with me, James replied, but Sarah noticed he glanced away momentarily. Was he hiding something? Throughout the next day, townspeople offered unsolicited opinions. The mayor warned of Chicago's dangers. The minister reminded her of a woman's proper place. Even her friend Emma questioned her sanity. You'll be all alone, Emma whispered. At least here, you have us. That evening, James visited the library just before closing. As they walked outside afterward, Sarah noticed several men gathered across the street, including Edward, her former suitor. Word travels fast in small towns, James commented. They disapprove of me talking with a stranger, Sarah explained, suddenly aware of how close James was standing. His height, his scent, something woodsy and expensive, made her unexpectedly conscious of herself as a woman, not just a librarian. Yet none of them offered you the future you deserve, James observed quietly. Their eyes met briefly, and Sarah felt an unfamiliar flutter in her chest before looking away. Later that night, a knock startled her. Opening the door, she found Edward standing there, hat in hand. Sarah, I've been thinking. Perhaps I was hasty in ending our courtship. I could speak to the school board about a teaching position for you after we marry. Sarah stared at him. You're only here because someone else has shown interest in me. Edward's face reddened. That man is filling your head with impossible ideas. People are talking, Sarah. They say he might have improper intentions. Why else would he seek out an unmarried woman? His words planted a seed of doubt. What if James was lying? Thank you for your concern, Sarah said firmly, but I need to make this decision myself. The next morning, Sarah made her way to the stagecoach station where James waited for her answer. The entire town seemed to have gathered. You've made your decision, James said, more statement than question. Not exactly, Sarah replied, handing him a folded paper. These are my terms. She had drafted her conditions, a 3-month trial period, with return fare guaranteed if things didn't work out, her own byline on any material she authored. Most men wouldn't hire a woman who makes demands, James said, eyes scanning the page. Most men wouldn't hire a woman at all, Sarah countered. A smile spread across his face. I accept your terms. That day became the longest of Sarah's life. News of her decision spread like wildfire. Mrs. Holloway dramatically declared Sarah would return ruined and penniless within a month. That evening, Sarah visited her parents' graves. I hope I'm making you proud, she whispered, placing wildflowers on the simple markers. Walking back through town, she saw James dining alone at the restaurant. Through the window, she saw several men approach his table, including Edward. Sarah hurried inside. Everything all right here? She asked, sensing the tension. These gentlemen are concerned about your reputation, James explained calmly. They seem to think my intentions are dishonorable. My reputation is not their concern, Sarah replied. A single woman traveling with a bachelor? Living in Chicago without family? People will talk, Edward insisted. People already talk, Sarah said quietly. They've talked about me my whole life. Edward caught her arm as she turned to leave. Sarah, don't throw away everything for this fantasy. I'm willing to marry you, even now. You could have a respectable life here. Sarah gently removed his hand. A cage, no matter how nicely furnished, is still a cage. Outside, their arms brushed accidentally as she walked with James, sending an unexpected warmth through Sarah. She glanced up at him, catching him looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. The next morning, Sarah stood ready with her single trunk as the stagecoach waited. To her surprise, half the town had gathered despite the heavy rain. As the driver loaded her trunk, James appeared, offering his hand to help her board. Their fingers touched, lingering perhaps a moment longer than necessary. Just then, Edward pushed through the crowd with a small box containing a simple ring. My offer stands, he said quietly. Security, respect, a good life here among people who know you. Sarah looked from the ring to James waiting by the coach, then back to the familiar faces of Millfield. The life she knew versus the unknown. "I'm sorry, Edward," she said gently, closing the box and returning it. As she turned toward the stagecoach, a commotion erupted. A rider came galloping into town. "Telegraph from Chicago," he shouted, waving a paper. "For Mr. Harrison." James took the message, his face darkening as he read it. "Is something wrong?" Sarah asked. "There's been a fire," James said grimly. "My publishing house, it's gone." The crowd fell silent. Sarah's heart sank as she watched James read the telegram again, his hands trembling slightly. "Everything?" she asked quietly. "The main building is destroyed. The printing press, our paper stock, finished books. 3 years of work gone." Edward stepped forward, unable to hide his satisfaction. "Well, Miss Mitchell, it seems fortune has saved you from a terrible mistake. You'll be staying in Millfield after all." The town watched, waiting for Sarah's reaction. This was her moment of vindication or surrender. "No," she said firmly, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I'm still going to Chicago." Edward's smile vanished. "But there's no job anymore. There's still knowledge. There's still work to be done." Sarah turned to James. "Your company wasn't just a building, was it?" James looked up, confusion giving way to understanding. "No, we had authors, contracts, ideas. Then we rebuild," Sarah said simply. Edward stepped closer, his voice low. "He's using you, Sarah. Why else would he still want you to come? The respectable job is gone. Think about what that means." For a moment, doubt flickered across Sarah's face. She glanced at James, who stood waiting by the coach. "Mr. Harrison," she called out, "given these new circumstances, what exactly would my role be in Chicago?" The crowd leaned in, hungry for his answer. James met her gaze directly. "The same as before. I need someone with your mind, your talent. The building may be gone, but our vision isn't." Something in his voice convinced Sarah. "I'll take my chances," she said, climbing into the coach. 3 months passed in a blur of exhausting work. Chicago overwhelmed Sarah at first. The noise, the crowds, the sheer pace of life. James had rented modest rooms above a bookshop where they established temporary offices. True to his word, he treated her as an equal partner in rebuilding the business. But it wasn't easy. Investors laughed at seeing a woman in their meetings. Authors questioned her editorial judgment. Through it all, James stood by her, never once suggesting she return to Millfield. Sarah noticed how different he was from the men she'd known. When she spoke, he listened, truly listened. When she had an idea, he considered it on its merits, not her gender. And sometimes, when he thought she wasn't looking, she caught him watching her with an expression that made her heart race. "Why did you really come to Millfield?" Sarah asked one evening as they worked late. There must have been qualified editors closer to home. James was quiet for a moment. "Your father wrote to me about you for years. When he passed, I kept thinking about the brilliant woman he described, trapped in a town too small for her mind. He met her eyes. I waited until I had something worthy to offer you." 6 months after leaving Millfield, Sarah stood in the doorway of their new printing house, watching workers install the press. James joined her, his sleeve brushing against hers. That evening, he presented her with their first finished book. Sarah opened the cover and gasped. There on the title page, written by Sarah Mitchell. "Your words deserve recognition," James said, watching her face. As they walked back through the gaslit streets, James hesitated. "Sarah, I've been meaning to discuss something. Our partnership has been successful beyond my hopes, but I wonder if you might consider a more permanent arrangement. Are you offering me a permanent position?" "I'm offering you the company," James said. "Equal partners. Harrison and Mitchell Publishing." "Partners," she repeated, stunned. "Unless you'd consider another type of partnership as well," he added softly, taking her hand in his. "One that would make us partners in all things." Unlike Edward's proposal, born of possessiveness, James offered her equality in work and in life. Here was a man who saw her mind as her greatest asset, not her greatest flaw. 1 week later, Sarah walked into James's office with 2 contracts she had drafted herself, one for their business partnership and another, more personal agreement. "I accept both proposals," she said, "with my own terms, of course." James laughed. I would expect nothing less. 6 months later, Sarah returned to Millfield, not as a failure crawling back, but as a successful publisher promoting their new educational series. James accompanied her as both business partner and husband. The townspeople gathered at the school to hear her speak. Some faces showed genuine admiration. Others barely concealed shock at her transformation. Mrs. Holloway, who had predicted her ruin, sat speechless in the front row. Edward arrived late, slipping into the back of the room. His eyes widened seeing Sarah confidently addressing the crowd, standing beside the distinguished man who had once been just a mysterious stranger with a proposal. "Knowledge isn't just found in books," she told the assembled crowd. "Sometimes it's found by taking a journey into the unknown, by risking failure to discover what you're truly capable of becoming." As she spoke, her gaze briefly met Edward's in the audience. For a moment, she remembered the girl who had once desperately wanted his approval. Then she turned to James, who looked at her with unmistakable pride and love, and she smiled, knowing she had found something far better than acceptance. She had found someone who saw her true worth all along.